right, back for Gambling Chronicles, number 18. This episode, I'm going to give you a description of what it was like 2016 to 2020 when I started handicapping props and started my run-up as a sports bettor. 17 years of professional gambling now, 10 years of professional sports betting, 20 years of degenerate betting before that. It's basically led me to this episode. Maybe we'll call this my Mona Lisa episode, but I'm going to reveal a lot in this episode that I probably haven't talked about before. Just getting to where I am now, a lot of blood, sweat, tears, emotional ups and downs, which all need to be mastered. I never really set out to be a good sports bettor or a great sports bettor, or never even thought I was going to be a winning sports bettor. It just kind of happened. It really just kind of happened almost by accident. I feel like I'm going to lead you to the next episode where, I basically reached the pinnacle of sports betting for me. Now, that's a different answer for everybody. Like, what is the absolute pinnacle of sports betting? Well, this isn't just about me. Like, by reaching the very highest of high levels that I possibly can, I've helped many friends, family, people I work with hit new levels, and whatever they're doing in sports betting. A lot of them were losing bettors before. So, that's one thing that I always think about. If I think back on like everything that I've accomplished myself over the past decade, I wouldn't have been able to do it without, all the people around me. I've been able to take lifelong losers and turn them into winners just by saying, hey, just listen to me. I've acquired all this knowledge. Just do what I say and we will be good. And it's worked out every time. Again, like, I don't think there's anybody I've ever worked with that has lost money, like in any kind of partnership with me, unless they quit really quick, or that's pretty much the only way. I mean, anyone that's ever been in a partnership with me that I can think of has won. And that's, over 100 people easily. But anyhow, let's see here. What else do we got here? Knowing that, not only did I solidify my life doing this, but, helping out others, that's huge for me. I like to see everybody do well. I'm not a selfish person. I'm probably the least selfish person in this industry, to tell you the truth. I'm not selfish at all, and I just want to see everybody do well. Let me see, where are we going here? So I'm going to talk about my run-up in college football and NFL player props. The majority college football, which started, around 2016. This is basically going to tell you how I did it and how I reached my version of hitting the absolute pinnacle of where I wanted to be after I started winning at sports betting. Obviously, there's room for me to grow and go to other places, but as far as like handicapping props, like, there was a pretty good run up, and I just hit a spot that it felt really good. Almost the feeling like if you were in a fucking rock band and now you got like the number one record on the charts for a couple of years. Kind of felt like that, So anyway, I'm not comparing what I did against what anyone else did. I'm just going to tell you what I did and kind of how I did it. Let's see here. So yeah, first off, there were never really any plans to become a professional sports bettor. It just happened and I ran with it. When I started capping these props, I'd already been playing poker professionally for 7 years or so. And I've been playing online poker already for 12 years. The 5 years before, I was a professional, I was a loser. Maybe I was a winner. I just didn't know how to hold on to a bankroll, just playing too big, playing drunk, whatever. I might have had the skills to do it. Probably not, but, that was kind of like my college for gambling. But anyhow, let's see here. Mostly everything I did with sports betting, I figured it out all by myself, trial and error, at least from the start, for the first 4 or 5 years or so. Everything that I learned was by trial or error. I've never read a sports betting book. There was no data, no research, really no one that could kind of guide me along as far as the props go. There's just wasn't a lot of that stuff out there. Now, if I log on Twitter right now, there's a zillion people posting pics and talking about doing this and doing that. There's all these podcasts you can learn from. There was none of that in 2016. Maybe there were a few, but there weren't a lot. Nothing like there is today. That stuff really, I believe, started taking off right around the pandemic. And as, legalization occurred. So, there was really the only background I really had was I knew if I discovered an edge, how to hammer it and how hard to hammer it, depending on how good the edge was. And that's what I did in poker. Like I've told you guys before, I was a heads up limit bum hunter. And when I got a hold of a bum, I would just destroy them. And I would just systematically figure out how to break them down and just take all their money. And hopefully they would come back every day. So yeah, it was just sheer boredom for me. Let me see here, and I was just trying to see if a problem could be solved while doing something I love, which is playing around with college football numbers. As far as just getting ahead in life, you got to find spots or get ahead in gambling for the most part. And this is for most people. There's other people that are just wizards and can just do it and figure it out, whatever. But for the most part, most people, you need to find spots where you're dealing with somebody who is clueless or where the entire market can't see what is going on, but you can. So, the whole, usually getting ahead in life is good if you're dealing with somebody who doesn't have a clue. Maybe you own a pizza shop and you could charge $50 a pizza and maybe it's really good pizza, but maybe it's only worth $20 or $25, but you sell it for 50. That's how you get ahead. You can exploit people's quote unquote stupidity or whatever. And you can do that with sports books too. And you can do that with people that set lines. My best gambling friend, who I've talked about before, who's guided me a lot up until that point, even still to today when we talk about stuff. I value his opinion tremendously on just about any topic that comes up, no matter what it is. But, he's made millions of dollars in casinos, sports, poker. He's won at every form of gambling. And he always told me, and this was even before I was a professional poker player when we were talking, or maybe around the time I was starting as a professional poker player, he'd always tell me, it's this simple. If the line's 3.5, okay, on Bovada, 5 minutes before post, but it's 2.5 all across the internet, you just take the 3.5. So his theory was, you just take stuff that's plus EV, you throw it off the wall, and it will stick if you get enough volume. And that's what he did. He was just a master of taking that type of value in the early 2000s to mid 2000s. And all the way up until, probably up until now. I mean, anything this guy found value on, he just took care of it. But, that seemed obvious to me. And, but the bottom line is, it takes a lot of time to do that. And as I'm playing professional poker player, now you got to you start dedicating time to this, then maybe you're losing value on the poker side. So I just kind of had the tunnel vision. I stuck with the poker. I was a DGen sports bettor before, and I just didn't really want to put the time into doing the sports stuff. And, his theory was, and you hear people out there all the time that are like, saying like, I don't have enough money. I only have $100 or $500. Well, he just told me, if you have $100 and you just keep doing this, it's going to grow. If you don't touch it, it's just going to grow like a mutual fund or whatever, or your poker graph that just goes straight up. It's going to do that, but it's going to take time, and you can learn along the way. And it definitely is possible to do something and start with a bankroll that small, which is why, like, I spoke about this in the last episode. Some kid reaching out to me, and he's still sending me data, and he wants to do like NBA at 2:00 in the afternoon against like Pinnacle Lines or something like that. And it's like, bro, if it's that good, start with $100 and let's see where you go. Start with $1,000, whatever you have. If it's that good, it's just going to win. You can get it down. So, well, that made sense to me. I was just good at making money at poker, and that's what I was doing around that time. Or maybe I hadn't even broken into poker yet when he told me that, but it's just an anecdote that, you take the value, you can win. And it's just true. So, I'm going to tell you how I built a player prop model from scratch, and it's based off of past performance. And that, at least back in 2016, is how they should have been setting the line, is by past performance. Now, how they do that, I don't know. But it's very clear as day that they weren't setting it by past performance. Maybe they were using an average. I can't remember. But even if it was an average, that's super exploitable. But the stuff was just way too high, and you just had to bet a lot of unders. I know how I would have set the lines, and it's certainly not the way they would have set the lines. And that's kind of how I systematically broke them down, is I was able to set my own number and just say, all right, that's too high. That looks right. They got this one right. But the ones that they didn't get right, I just hammered. So past performance is the most important thing that's going to go into any prop line. Assuming the same players are playing, which they usually do in football, barring injuries week in and week out, which is much different than basketball because, especially with the NBA, guys are sitting out all the time. So, 2016, it was some random guy in an office tasked with, put up the line for the Bama-Georgia game, okay? And I don't know, maybe it took them 5 minutes to do it. I don't know how they did it, but, that's just how it was. And I'm going to quote Kirk Evans here. He once said, a shitty model, he said this not too long ago, about a month ago, a shitty model is better than no model. And while the model that I came up with may have been shitty, when it came to the nuts and bolts, it worked. And it worked really fucking good. Like millions of dollars in profit. I've tipped out busting this out for years, but now's the time. I'm going to bust it out today and kind of give you a little breakdown of how this came together, etc. So I've trolled math nerds, when they're talking about all these fucking terms that nobody on fucking Twitter besides the other nerds understand what they're talking. They're talking about fucking galactic fucking Bayesian thinking and all this other bullshit. Like 90%, 95% of people don't know what the fuck these guys are talking about. But I'll troll these guys and just say, it's not that fucking difficult. But the truth is, I respect those guys a lot. A lot of those guys, brilliant minds, shout out guys like Plus EV Analytics. But, at the end of the day, like, you don't need all that shit to win. Maybe more and more as the years go by, you will need all this fucking, all this advanced stuff. But I still think right now you don't. And back then you certainly didn't. So anyhow, I'm going to tell you about this model. You can call it a model, a system, I printed profit with for 10 years. Not much effort. The hardest part was getting the money down. and scaling, and then eventually getting the money down. And that was the hard part. Coming up with the winners wasn't hard. But first I'm going to talk about like what does it take to be successful. If you have a weak mindset, you're never going to be successful. Be successful, if you have a weak mindset, you need to change it. If you have a strong mindset and you believe, then you're on the right path. But you just need to believe that you can accomplish anything and fucking go for it. And, if there's any leaks or, you got a flat tire here, flat tire there, you just got to fucking fix it. If you can't fix a flat tire, you got to learn how to fix the fucking flat tire. Or your car's just going to fucking stay in neutral, spinning your wheels. You just got to know that you're going to work your way towards accomplishing those goals. You need to be willing to learn, accept criticism, and take constructive criticism the right way. That might fix some leaks. Some people don't have thick skin and they can't take it, but you need that. And, maybe sometimes I haven't had that thickest of skin, but you need to fucking grow that thick skin so you can get through it. You need to accept failure when it happens. Try and figure out why. When you fall down, you just got to get the fuck up and move forward. You have to have the fucking drive to be the absolute best. The fucking absolute best. You just got to show up and let nothing or nobody stop you. And if somebody does try to stop you or talk you out of whatever, and you're on the right path, you just got to fucking run through that wall. It's the middle of Thanksgiving, and I'm saying this not as this Thanksgiving, which was yesterday, but the fucking paperhead posts the fucking line for the Egg Bowl back in 2017. You got to excuse yourself and pretend like you're going to the basement bathroom to take a shit. Hammer your bets in. Maybe you got to cap them in while you're pretending you're taking a shit on the fucking toilet. You just got to fucking every little nook and cranny edge. You leave nothing out there. You go to fucking all extremes to get every little bet down. Especially when you had the type of edge that I had back then. It just doesn't matter what's going on. You got to grind and put that effort in. I remember even in my honeymoon in 2016, sitting by a pool in Mexico, grinding on my laptop, just chilling out. This is when I just started doing it. I'm like, wow, this is so fucking easy. Just click these buttons, boom, 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 boom. And, there's another thing about like, trying to get out of that mindset. I heard a podcast with like Joe Rogan and Adam Carolla a few weeks back where one part really struck home with me. Carolla was talking about growing up poor, without a lot of things. You become a buyer into that mindset. And that's kind of where I came from. Not that I didn't grow up poor. I grew up like, lower middle class, but there was like no preaching on like what you're going to do for the future. It was like, what kind of job are you going to get when you're out of high school? Not much talk about college or, about great things that you can potentially do. That's just not the kind of household that I came out of. So the truth of the matter is, if you grow up in a mindset like that, it's hard to get out of it. If you live a life believing there's no future, it can become pretty toxic in many ways. It can take you down the wrong paths. Ultimately, I believe that's where my life kind of fell off the tracks when I was in my teens. But I wouldn't change any of it. It led me to talking to you right now today. All the trials, tribulations, ups, downs. Now I'm here, whatever, and I'm fucking talking to you guys about this. So, I was lucky to fall into like the online poker community in like 2003 or whatever. You meet all these people who think differently, most very logical, witty. It took me till I was like 27 to get into a community like that actually helped me get sober, think better. I mean, by default, it just helped me get sober and clean because now I'm doing something I love and I'm learning. There's nothing better than, and it's a quote from Haralabob, there's nothing better than if you can make a living using math somehow. Any type of math. It doesn't matter what kind of math it is, but whether it's extreme or basic. If you can make a living using math, then fucking hats off to you. So I'm going to take you back to this time. There's no unabated, no ETR. Maybe ETR was around, but there was very little projections back in 2016, especially for like college football. And if they did have projections, nobody was really betting the college football props at scale that I know of. Today there's projections everywhere, but I'll stand by, like, if you lock me in a room and you lock somebody else in the room and you just give us both a laptop, all we can look at is box scores and game logs for players. And whoever has the highest winning percentage after 6 months gets to leave. The other guy has to stay in there for the rest of his life. Nobody's going to beat me. Nobody. Obviously, today there's far more and better ways to win, but that's where I started, and that's what worked for me. I felt the same way with Heads Up Poker for a while. You have all these fucking brilliant guys around me, using heads up displays, exploiting them, people's weaknesses showing up, right on the screen, telling you that this person, he's folding this, that, the other thing. Or like studying, GTO, Game Theory Optimal, or, using real-time assistance. I used none of that shit. All I used was my brain just to systematically beat people down, see the spots as they were, and that worked for me. So, and it probably should go without saying that I'm not the most technological person when it comes to that shit either. And it does take a learning curve to go through it if you're not, if you're not familiar with a lot of that stuff. So I just used my brain and I did very well for myself. So like, yeah, what I've accomplished over the last 10 years, it could be done again. Doubtful in the same market, due to the limits getting tighter, lines getting tighter, and there's just more eyes on the screen. It's just harder now, but most likely somebody listening to this is going to find a fucking edge in some new market that is just new, or some type of SGP thing, or maybe on these prediction markets. That's maybe a spot where I'm missing out right now because I'm focusing on other things. But if I wasn't focusing on, running a business right now, then maybe that's something that I should be looking more at. I just don't have the time. People link me to stuff all the time. Look at this and look at that, and look at this. I just don't have the time, and I'm doing fine. So I don't need to jump into those markets right now. But anyhow, it's the fall of 2016, just sitting in my home office in Lowell, Massachusetts, bored. I had a few poker lobbies open. My buddy Joseph Lupo, he'd been telling me how soft these prop markets were for years, and how soft the Super Bowl prop markets were. And I recall him telling me there was this guy named the Guru. I actually think I still have an email when he introduced me to him in like 2014 or 2015. And I think he told me this guy was betting like 10K a pop. And I think he eventually quit because they got tough, quote unquote. But he probably made so much money if he was betting these for 10K a pop before then, if he was betting them at scale. But it seems insane to me that like they got tough, because when I got in, I thought they were soft. So maybe they were just way softer before me. But soft is different for everybody. I met some guys in the spring who made more money than me betting college props last year, who had a higher ROI than me betting college props last year. And, hats off to them. So I remember 2016 Super Bowl, I started random firing just a bunch of props, unders, on that Super Bowl between like Denver and Carolina. I looked at the screen, I had money on a poker site, and then I just looked at, my buddy says these are soft, whatever. I just looked at them and I just random fired. I didn't even research anything. I'm like, they all look too high. And I probably won like 80% of them. So this day, fall of 2016, I'm playing Heads Up on the Merge Network, waiting for my usual Saturday opponent. I remember I had this guy. He wasn't the worst of the worst, but he would show up and he would donate, $1,000 or $2,000 to me on Saturdays, most days. He'd get me sometimes, but, he usually showed up. I was waiting for him. I had a few poker sites open. Fortunately, back then, Bitcoin had all these sites were picking up Bitcoin. It's easy to move money in and out of sites. Had the sports lobby open, and I just looked to see if they had college football player props, because I don't think it was that year. It might have been the year before that. My buddy was telling me, like, Deion Sanders kid, he was a wide receiver for like SMU or Houston or something, and they listed him at like 3.5 catches, and he was like 7th on the depth chart or something. He might have like got in on special teams. He played, but it was just an easy win. So I just was a little curious here. So, I open the lobby up. I see this, this just chest of player props. And that's when the war started, right then and there. It was going to be me versus the offshore, the Costa Ricans, or whoever was originating or coming up with these lines. It was just going to be me versus them. Up until this point, this was one thing I did have going for me. I'd been playing college fantasy football since 2000. Like, that's probably when fantasy football in the NFL started to explode. And that was still early. That's probably even before fantasy football really exploded. Fantasy football probably exploded 5 or 6 years after that. But, we play college fantasy football with every single team in the country. So, that was pretty big. 16 years of that, just doing that, every team in the country. As a DGen gambler back then, I probably bet more action point wagers or points bet wagers than anybody in the history of the world. And I've said that a couple times on here, but it's the truth. I would bet a ton of those every week for years and years and years. And, it was just, so I kind of had a baseline of how these games would go, whether it was like a 20 to 30 point favorite or a 7-point favorite. Just had a general idea. So, doing the college football thing, the fantasy, I knew every player, coach, every offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator without bat an eye. You could ask me, I'd tell you who was the coordinator. If they went to another school, I would know they went to that other school. And that's the biggest thing in like college football is the system that you run. Every system is differently. Some guys are run heavy. Some guys are pass heavy. And the variance between results is just massive compared to the NFL, which is like super cookie cutter. It's, every game is like, it's a 5-point spread with a 45-point total. Every game, every week. Some of them a little higher, some of them a little lower, but for the most part, you have that baseline. College football, it's much different than that. The first 2 or 3 weeks of the college football season, you're going to see a lot of things that you don't see in the NFL. Again, you're going to see 30, 40, 50-point spreads. And then you have sports books that week 4 now, Alabama or somebody just played 3 weeks with these massive point spreads, and then they got to try, and they're putting props out for these games, and then they got to try and put props out for week 4 in conference play. That's not easy to do. Like, it'd be hard for anybody to do that. It'd be hard for me to do that. I mean, I could probably do a better job than these guys were at the time, but I think you get where I'm going with this. When you're setting a prop line for 30, 40, 50-point spread, then you got to set one for something that looks like an NFL game, a 1 to 10-point spread with like a 45-point total in an SEC game or an ACC game or a Big Ten game. It's very difficult to do. So, for an example here, Alabama's running back might go for like 200 yards versus scrubs, some scrub team. Or maybe he goes for 30 yards and they just get up so much and then they just rest him. Bama wins 65-0. Then you have scrubs that played in that game where he rushed for only 30. And maybe they're lining the scrubs the next week, but that they're 4th on the depth chart and they might get 2 snaps in the game, stuff like that. Those type of edges you're not going to find now. Quarterback rotations, pre-portal, new coaches and coordinators moving to schools, which is hugely important. That was huge, but a 200-yard team may now become a 350-yard passing team. A 350-yard passing team may become a 200-yard passing team. But they're basing stuff not on the coordinators. They were basing stuff on what happened the prior year with the quarterback that was there, or, whatever. Or you could have a guy coming from like an option offense that transfers to Michigan or something, and then they set him like super low, and maybe they should set him at 225 passing. They'd set him at 120. I'm just throwing that one out there as an example, but like stuff like that. There's just so many differences that are different than the NFL, and it takes a lot to keep up with it all. Quarterback rotations. You see less of those, I feel, now in college football. Guys coming in for 10, 15 snaps, because a lot of the talent, or the bottom end talent, just fluctuates to other schools through the portal. They get paid, and I feel like the whole landscape has stabilized a little bit, which has better play across the board, like as an average, but it's not good for betting props for me, because there's just less stuff to exploit. And even if there was something there to exploit, it'll just get picked up on quicker. Back then, it wouldn't get picked up on. But yeah, they just couldn't. They could not price that stuff correctly. And when they got more data in the middle of the season, they just couldn't price it correctly. Whatever their process was to price was fucking terrible. At the end of the day, they would just put out guys, like I said, based on last year's statistics. So let me see here. I gave you an example on like the first or second podcast where they priced a guy who was an absolute statue, which was the Dylan Raiola, the quarterback on Nebraska, just because he was the number one recruit in the country last year. And, we made hundreds of units just betting against his rushing totals. But he was the number one recruit in the country, and then they open his rushing yards at like 35 or something, or it might have even been 40, and then it drops to 35, 30, 25. And we just bet it all the way down to pretty much zero. And we did that for multiple weeks. Like, we had a pretty good storm there, but stuff like that, it was even worse back then. Like, it's hard to find those nowadays. So let me see here. What do we got here? Yeah, like the crazy thing is, like, guys like that ran the air raid, this is another one, like Cliff Kingsbury, or like Mike Leach when he was at Washington State, or Cliff Kingsbury when he was at Texas Tech, like when Mahomes was there. Let's say these teams are averaging 350 passing a game for the starting quarterback. Starting quarterback, let's assume they get hurt in the middle of the game. Some guy comes in, the backup throws for 200 yards, and then the backup starting the next week, they would just set the line at 200 yards, not taking into consideration that it was a 350-yard per game passing, juggernaut or whatever. They would just set the guy at 200. Like, those situations came up often. They don't come up really anymore. And if they do, if something like that comes up, it's gone in a second. Let me see here. What else do we got here? You'd have situations where there's an all-world ACC running back. Let's say they have 2 tough games to start the season against like an SEC or a Big Ten. They got a tough schedule for some reason. And he runs for 70 yards. Then they go to ACC play, so he averaged 35 yards a game. Goes to ACC play. They put him at 50, and they're 14-point favorites, and, maybe the line should have been 100. So, you're looking at something that's 40 or 50 yards off there. Stuff like that. Same thing like that could happen with the Bama running back. First 2 weeks, maybe he runs for 350 versus 2 scrubs. But then, the next week, so he's averaging 175. They play Georgia the next week, or a pretty good SEC defense, and they just set him at 150. And it's like, okay, this is like, I don't know, 70 or 80 yards too high. So you just fade that. You go back and look at some of those Clemson and Alabama defensive lines. Like one of the years Clemson won the national championship, I think when Lawrence was there, the entire D line or something was drafted in the first round. All the linebackers were like high-end first-round talent, just loaded across the board. And, the Alabama D-line, same way some of those years. And then they would just set the Vanderbilt running back against Alabama at whatever their average was. And in a lot of cases in those games versus those juggernaut defenses, which you really don't see much anymore, you do with Ohio State. But again, like they will adjust the props based on how good they are. But back then, they're just like, all right, we'll just throw the fucking average out there. It'd be 40-0 at the half. And then sometimes the starters on the other team would go out. Sometimes the starters on Bama would go out or Clemson. And you could just cap that knowing, okay, well, they're favored by like whatever, 42. They might be up 42 at the half. Like these guys are probably going to play X amount and not the full amount or whatever. It's just college football is a volatile sport when it comes to potential outcomes. It just changes week to week. Like I said before, then same thing, the NFL, it's just cookie cutter. It's total cookie cutter. And I think it's harder to find edges there. You can bet more money for sure, but it's not as easy to find the edges. It's just if you have some team like Bama or Georgia laying 40 for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they're laying 3 the next week, like how do you adjust those props? It's probably easier now with like simulations and shit, but back then they didn't have that. So at the end of the day, for me, it was common sense and just a willingness to pull the trigger and just steal all the money, and not coming up with narratives on why they're setting the lines the way they are, or this could happen or that could happen. A number one receiver, like let's just say Michael Crabtree, who's probably the greatest college receiver, or he's definitely in the top 5 of the last 25 years for college. And let's just say he was out. Whoever was elevated to like the number one receiver, if they knew that, they would just like overmove that guy and just put him close to what the number one guy was, when it just usually doesn't work out like that. Or they would the over moves, it was just insane. They would just give the number 2 like number 1 stuff, or if the number 2 was out, they would just make the number 3 guy now like an 85-yard receiver or something. This is back in the age when there was the offenses were still really, really humming, 40, 45, 50 TD quarterback, like quarterback touchdowns. You don't see a lot of that anymore. The touchdown numbers are way down. The defensive numbers seem like they've gotten a lot better across the board, especially with the portal going on, and there's just more balance. But at the end of the day, they were just getting all these lines wrong. Let me see. Yeah, and if I did lose a bet back then, it was most likely because the guy just got there, which happens sometimes, not because they priced it right. It was very rare that I got something wrong because they priced it right. Maybe they did, but I don't think that was the case. So, the common sense questions I asked myself when capping this stuff is, has this happened before? How often has this happened before? How many times is enough sample size to decide if it's worth pulling the trigger on this? And that's very important. The worst form of handicapping you can have is just thinking, oh, this is going to happen or that's going to happen, or this guy sucks, so I'm going to bet against him. Like, that's just like biased stuff. The numbers will always tell you the story. So I felt like I'm the teacher. I'm going to grade these tests. That's kind of how I looked at it, which is the entire board. You have the offshore origination guy. He's the student. He's putting the line out. Now, I'm going to grade the test. I'm not looking to figure out what the right line exactly is, but I'm going to find out why his answer is wrong in how I would set it. So if I find a mistake I thought this guy made, I would just make a bet. A lot of data nerds out there will tell you, you need more data or you want more data. You always want more data, But, there wasn't as much data, and that benefited me back then because it kept a lot of the nerds out of it that are in this now. I don't have some computerized model that can just sim the shit out of all this stuff and just get the answers. So, let me see. What I had back then was just common sense and curiosity. They say curiosity kills the cat, but it can lead to some very good things. Pattern recognition, that's just a pretty big skill of mine when it came to this stuff. It's a big part of handicapping without some type of computerized model or sim spitting out projections. But yeah, pattern recognition is huge. Like in poker, I'd be playing a guy heads up, and if every time he checked the flop, if I bet the turn, sometimes I'd play guys like that. They'd just check the flop when they were weak. I knew that, and I just bet the turn every time, and I take down the pot on the turn unless they improved. And I could just bet that turn literally like 100% of the time. Maybe once in a while I wouldn't with certain hands, just in case they called, and I didn't want them to see what I was doing as much. But situations like that, it's just pattern recognition on little simple things. If I was playing basketball against you and I tried to hit like a baby hook shot in the middle of the lane, and you keep trying to block it, well, eventually I'm just gonna up fake, draw the foul, and get some and ones against you. It's just about adapting to what you see. I used to drive. I remember driving home on holidays with my dad, cut through Burlington, Mass, right where Lakash's, bakery is, a famous bakery in Massachusetts. And I remember when I was little, I picked this up. He used to drive up, and there was a light, and we needed to keep going straight on this road, but he would always get in the right lane. He'd drive up about an eighth of a mile, and then he'd cut behind the bakery down this back alley, which was a road, and then he'd pop out, and we'd get ahead of like 30 cars every time. And I was like, wow, that's pretty fucking cool. But like stuff like that, you notice that little pattern type of stuff, and I don't know, maybe he saved us, an extra 5 minutes every time we were driving down that road when the light turned red. So anyhow, I'm going to give you an example here, and this is like a hypothetical. Let's say, hold on, I just lost this here. Let's see. Let's say you're driving down the street, and I put this out on Twitter a few years ago, and some people will, I don't know, I kind of cryptically did it, but, if you're driving down the street, and let's say you're delivering papers or something, right? There's 11 mailboxes on the street. 8 of them are blue, 2 of them are red. Random order, the first 10. You keep seeing this over and over again, but the 11th mailbox is covered. What color are you going to pick for the next mailbox? A fish is going to tell you it depends. The logical response, though, is it's blue. It's probably going to be blue. If you keep seeing 8 blue and 2 red, you just got to come to the conclusion it's going to be blue. And anyone that's going to try and figure out why that's red, unless there's some magical reason that you figure out, then I'll just turn out red, then whatever. But it's just logically going to be blue because there's always more blue mailboxes on the street. And then you start seeing the 11th mailbox. When you uncover all those mailboxes, you're going to see, well, maybe 80% of the time they're blue and 20% of their time they're red. And that's exactly what I did handicapping. So there's just an overwhelmingly amount of blue. So we pick that till we're proven wrong. When we're proven wrong, maybe we adjust. But when you continue to see blue on that 11th mailbox, you just get an idea. Okay, well, this is a pattern. Something happened 8 times, something didn't happen twice. And it's probably going to steer towards the blue. Now, what I'm getting at here is this is just, it's past performance trends. It's what has happened. The scope of player props, you can predict the future based on what has happened, barring something extreme like injuries or lineup changes. And again, in football, you're dealing with the same lineups for the most part week to week. And back then, season to season, the lineups weren't changing that much unless players graduated or went to the NFL. There were just a lot less transfers back then. So the question is, like, where do you draw the line? Well, I gave you an 80-20 scenario there, which is like shooting fish in a barrel. But when you start seeing like 5 and 5 on different streets, well, what do? Well, after you see like hundreds and thousands of different streets where it's like 5 blue and 5 yellow, and you got to try and predict the next color. Well, how do you predict the next color? Well, sports betting terms, you maybe can look at point spreads and see how did this player do in a similar point spread, especially in something like college football where the point spreads are all over the place. Well, maybe it's late in the season and you can key on how a guy did. All right, well, now they're laying 37 versus some scrub in week 13. Well, let's look back and see, was it similar usage in the first few weeks? Are they going to set this line based on the last 5 weeks, or how it's probably going to play out when it was, a 37-point spread? You can start doing stuff like taking probably a lot of the data that's going into the line now and just remove it, and just you can look, the answer's right there on the page for you. It'll basically tell you where something's going to land a lot of time. How do these coaches handle 40-point spreads, with their starters? How do teams getting blown out handle these fucking point spreads with their starters? These are things you can start to pick up on that it'll just give you an edge. Remember, we're not going up against, NBA sides and totals at Pinnacle 2 minutes before tip-off here. We're not. This is stuff, we can find holes in it, and we can find the answers and get to a conclusion pretty quick. Oftentimes, like I was saying before, these teams be up 40 points and they would just rest their starters. And if you know that's going to happen and you've seen it play out before, you have an idea of what's going to happen. So some of these lines could be off by, you could have a quarterback off by 75 yards in a situation like this. Go look at how much Tua played, I think, his last year at Alabama. Just thinking back to that one. He'd play a quarter sometimes. They'd be up 28-35. They eventually started adjusting a little bit, but maybe for a while you got, just some theft. So, I would ask myself a lot of questions like these and just apply common sense. I didn't really know it at the time, but I was starting to build like a foundation of a football prop model that would just win me, like I said, millions of dollars, like just common sense stuff like this. And again, there was nobody in the market back then. It was basically just me. Some of the stuff would move, but not on a grand scale. So anyhow, I was always intrigued with how numbers came together. I remember like when I learned how multiplications came together, multiplying in like 3rd or 4th grade, whenever I learned multiplications, it blew my mind. I started just thinking of everything. I didn't walk around thinking of numbers, but like numbers just, I loved numbers. I loved counting things. Bored at the doctor's office and there's no magazines, or you read all the magazines, I'd start counting tiles. How many go up? Look above me. How many go up? How many go across? Stuff like that would go through my head. I would just always be counting things to see which patterns, shapes, stuff like that, whatever. So yeah, I just loved numbers, and then algebra was the same way, finding why a number fits here, why it doesn't fit here, how it comes together, how to solve these equations. And I did mention this in the notes the other day. Like, I remember I took acid one day, LSD, went to school, probably went in, I don't know, like a few hours into school, tripping my fucking balls off. And, I had to take an Algebra 2 test, and I finished it in like 5 minutes, aced it, dropped it up at the teacher's desk, and she just looked at me like, well, you got to finish it. I'm like, I did finish it. Everybody's just kind of looking at me. Everybody probably knew I was a little fucked up that day too. But yeah, basic, simple math. It was just fun for me. But I don't recommend anyone don't take acid and go to school. Wasn't fun. It was pretty frightening, actually. So, in that year I got 0 credits in school. Failed every class because I was absent too many times. I probably had the highest average in that class, but you just don't get any credits if you don't show up to class in high school. So, but let's get back to gambling here and small samples and gambling on small samples. Pulling the trigger on small samples will potentially get you rich in gambling or get you ahead if you know you have that edge or you find that edge. Now, I'm of the opinion to make a lot of money versus certain weak markets, you have to become an absolute master of judging whether a good bet or a bad bet is being made by looking at data on a very small sample size. It could be as little as 1, it could be as little as 2, it could be as little as 3. You have to be willing to pull the trigger and feel that they're wrong with the lines, and you could make a better line based off the data you hold, or find a flaw in how they're setting their number. By getting hundreds, thousands of reps, I just kept cultivating this process, became seamless, was able to trim the fat off certain things and make not good, but great decisions on small pieces of data. For years, I was able to look at certain things, certain situations, and just say, well, this has taken place 3 times. Went one way twice, went the other way once. Sometimes that's enough to pull the trigger on a mass scale of bets across the board without looking at any factors at all. Because again, if the lines are bad and you can just see a trend like that, even if it's just 2 to 1, you could pull the trigger on a mass scale and have an edge. This may sound too good to be true, but the fact of the matter is, if the lines are that bad at open, you do that 60 times on 60 bets in one weekend, you're going to win way farther of north of 60% back then. And I tell you this, not only because I lived this, but the truth of the matter is, like back then, if you blind bet every under, you were probably winning around 60%. It's hard to get down that much money on every under across the board. But there was research I remember even 2020, 2019, and I'm talking back to 2016 when it was worse. The numbers were worse then, but it was I think the first year of DraftKings, there was some study or something. If you just bet every under, you won 58 or 60 or 61%. So imagine you're already winning 60% to start just by betting unders, which I was mostly doing. And then, you have a 3-game sample and I don't look at anything else for the most part, unless it's those extreme examples with the Alabamas playing scrubs and going into conference. And if it all looks pretty good and lines up, now I'm just taking 2 to 1 trends and betting all unders. My 60% is just going to grow naturally because that's just what's going to happen when you have 2 to 1 trends 60 times. And you can see it within the numbers that the 2 are probably way off from the 1. And again, I'm betting only unders here. So the win rate's just going to catapult when you do that naturally. And that's all I needed really when I started. And I printed for years, replicating that, refining processes over and over to tailor all these specific scenarios. I planted this seed. And I was just able to look at every game log a player played up to a certain number, and I would be able to get to a number where I thought the line should be. If I was setting the line and putting it out there for people to bet, it's just process of elimination and narrowing it down. And and I'm going to say it again, just going like this. And people started to call me a fraud after my Circles Off episode, because I did something like this and I thought I was going to go viral for being like some type of fucking idiot. You start here and you just narrow it down. You get rid of all the shit and you just bring it in and you come to a number. And that's all you really needed to do or what you need to do. And that's basically what a modern day, whatever type of sim or model is going to do. It's going to filter out all the trash and get a baseline number of maybe where something should land. And you can do that in football, but you just have to judge stuff on a small sample and find the right pieces to go into the puzzle. So that's what I wanted. I wanted to win north of 60%. I figured out, I just wanted to reduce variance. My background was a bum hunter, no variance. I rarely ever had like losing poker months. Even poker weeks were, for the most part, when I was only playing heads up, very rare. So I don't want the variance. I just want to win and win all the time. It's good for your mind too. It's probably good for your mind to lose sometimes too and learn how to deal with losing. But when you'd rather just win all the time if you can. So the number I came up with was like, when I first started doing this, even like the first day, I had pen and paper. I said, all right, well, 63% at minus 120 will generate more profit, I think, than like being a 1% edge winner in the NFL or whatever. And these look weak. So that's where I want to be. I want to be around 63%. So by using process of elimination, whittling down past game logs and data from like similarly lined games, I was able to win north of that in a lot of years. In some of the years, like maybe as high as 75% some of the years versus some of these paperheads is they were copying stale lines that were, that should have been moved hours before or whatever. It was basically as simple as this. Like you get a 5-game sample. Let's say there's 3 unders and 2 overs. Well, you don't really want to bet that blind that, let's just say those numbers are true. Yeah. You bet the three games that went under and you bet under, and you're betting under now on the 6th game. Well, 60% maybe doesn't give you enough cushion to overcome whatever stuff you're looking at. So you got to look into those 5 game logs and maybe find out why something fits or something doesn't fit in there. And then you can maybe throw out the junk or see why it's priced correctly because of whatever. You could just eliminate one of those game logs. Now, maybe you're at 3-1 and you're like, okay, maybe this will win 75% of the time because this, maybe there was 140 points scored in the game. Now that's, a little insane, but you get what I'm saying. You could throw an anomaly out, maybe something like that. Something that's just not going to happen that often. If you get a 6-game sample where the trend's just 4-2, you just bet it, okay? That 66% winning percentage based off of the past game logs is probably good enough to beat whatever line the bookmakers are putting out there at the time. And that could go for NFL too, not just college. You just bet. If you go back and look at any of that, those trends would just be winning bets back then. 7-game sample, same thing. If it's 4-3, you got 4 unders, 3 overs. And again, I'm looking for unders. I can maybe go in there and find out why that's right or wrong, which is going to steer me the right way. 8-game sample. I think it's, so you're 5-3 on unders, which is, I think, 62.5%. You could almost auto fire that back then, but maybe do a little bit of digging. But I think you get the point. I was just looking for anything that did or didn't make sense to exploit the line they were dealing me. Like, it was already clear as day that the unders were the winners. And, the first, month I bet this stuff, I probably won, 70% just doing this, just going in. And then you were also able to merge the prior season's data, maybe with what you were looking at week 1, or you just use that as a baseline to go off of week 1. Juju Smith-Schuster was one of the first props I bet his last year at USC. I looked at the game logs, and it was from the prior year, nothing really changed, but now they just set him at this absurd number, and he went under 9 times the prior year, and he went over twice. So I just auto bet the under. It's that fucking simple. So I started with stuff like that, just betting trends from the year before based off game logs that were 65% or higher. And again, you couldn't do that now because of the portal. But with teams that were all together back then and the system's staying the same, if the system didn't change, you just bet that trend that's 7-3 or 8-2 or 9-3 or 10-2 or 11-3, whatever it was. You just bet those and let the chips fall where they may. You're going to win more than you're going to lose. And the ones that you do lose, maybe you figure out why you lost them. Maybe it wasn't because of the guy just ran hot. Maybe something did change that you didn't get. But again, you do this over a mass scale of 40, 50, 100 bets, you're just going to see a 60+% win rate go. But the key was like the priors helped back then from the year before. There just wasn't as much movement with offensive coordinators, coaches, or rosters. And if there was, you could see where they came from and what they did there and kind of what kind of system a team was going to run. It was just very, very good, like with the completions and stuff like that. A coach comes to a roster and, maybe they were a 15 completion team. Now they're a 24 completion team. Stuff like that. You're just able to get stuff off by 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 completions. It was just so far off that it was easy. So doing these little things with these trends, I was able to pick up an edge. Some of this stuff you can do today, but not like you could back then on a mass scale. It's gotten harder and harder each year, but the truth is it worked. But again, I would not try to win like this now. The market, it's just so much more efficient at open. There's bad openers in every sport you can find, no matter where you bet. But it's just way, way more efficient, quicker. Stuff that used to just sit at the casino. If the lines pop up now and I try to drive to the casino half an hour down the road, I might miss 4 bets. So that's just the way the market moves now. Back then there was no onshore betting. It was all offshore betting. Spanky was talking about this on his latest Q&A about, printing $10,000 a day in the early days of, MLB ARBs on his latest Q&A. And this was my version of that. I was just, I didn't know this when I started, but if I just bet all the unders, I'm winning at least 60%. Now I just put all these trends into this, what I'm doing now. Now I'm winning way north of 60%. And I'd already been through the poker thing. And I knew that I moved up too slow playing heads-up poker. I probably could have made a lot more money. So I knew when I got a hold of an edge that I had to fucking hammer it. Because the stuff usually doesn't sit around for a long time. So anyhow, Spanky was talking about that. The, 10K a day variance free with MLB ARBs every day in the early days. The bottom line is the best gamblers that today, they had just low variance, high ROI spots when they broke through. Any poker player that had a pulse in the 90s, when there was very much less information, just won. Look at all those TV superstars in the early 2000s. Most of those guys are all broke now, but back then they were able to win because they knew more than everybody else. Even online superstars like Galfond, Tom Dwan, they didn't make it to the top. They made it to the top because they were definitely smart and they were great poker players. But they were beating on some of the weakest players, and just whether they were bum hunting by default because the people that were playing them just weren't even close to the same league as them. And those guys didn't know that. The guys that were playing them didn't know how good these guys probably were. But again, you need bums to run to the top unless you are some genius that can just do things at a high level and adapt to the market, etc. But on a grand scale, for most people, to get to the top, you need some weak spots. And I'm not discrediting those guys at all. Those guys are brilliant. My point is, there's just a starting point where everybody builds a bankroll. You can go back to just about anybody. At the end of the day, you just need to be better than your competition. My competition was just offshore guys putting out weak openers in a market that was relatively new. I don't know how much of it was there before me, but the stuff that I was betting at like minus 120, I would have priced it minus 170 or higher, maybe minus 200 on a lot of the stuff. Imagine knowing right now that you could just log on to let's just say FanDuel, and you just see a slew of games that are minus 110 or 120. Let's just say they're sides and totals. Imagine that you knew that those should be priced minus 170 all the way down the board, or some of them be priced at like 200, because the math, it's not that hard to do. When you have something that's as consistent as past prior game logs where stuff is 7-3 or 8-2, well, if you bet something 10 times where it's 8-2, you know, and you bet it $100 each, well, you're profiting around $600 doing that. So, you know, you could do the math and figure it out yourself. Like even something like that, like just to break even, they could have put those lines at minus 400. And those trends continued through the next season for the most part. So like some of that stuff maybe should have been priced like competently at, I don't know, minus 300, minus 350. I don't know. There were some extreme examples, stuff that just never happened before. And there's this bad line shows up. You know, and I was just lucky. It's the first form of real origination that I tried. And I walked into this market with nobody else in it. You know, I just couldn't believe I walked into this after I found it. You know, it's just a perfect storm. I had a little bit of a bankroll, and I had the balls to scale it when I knew that I couldn't lose. You know, even if it did lose for a week or two, which was rare, I knew, you know, after seeing what I saw week to week, like, you know, the worst part, you're running into break even weeks or months or whatever. You know, maybe a break even month back then. But yeah, like a break even week maybe. But usually if I had a break even week, I learned a lot from it. And if I did have a break even week, most likely what happened the next week would be the guys that I had a break-even week betting against, they would over-adjust the lines the next week. I probably got them all right. And then I'm firing against, like, even fucking higher lines that probably should have been, that weren't even close. So, you know, the odds were just, they were just in my favor. And let me see here. So yeah, I just got to the point where I just kept building my bankroll, and I was just betting enough where I'd never be able to bust my bankroll betting this way, especially, you know, if these lines continue to stay there. You know, if you're beating the closing line by 50 cents every game, and I was probably beating it by a lot more than that, it's going to be hard to go broke. Now, technically, I wasn't beating the closing line, but as I was able to set what I thought the closing line should be. And over time, it was just proven to be very, very accurate, like how I was thinking and how I was pricing these. And they just weren't pricing them that way. They were just throwing numbers out. Still don't know how they were doing it. You know, and also with props, eventually you do get to a point where it's hard to bet enough to even dent your bankroll unless they're taking massive, massive, massive props. And it's just hard to get there where you're going to bet that much as to where it can really hurt you. Unless you're just, you know, betting 5 props a week all in with your bankroll. But like I said, like that's irresponsible, but it's hard to get to that point. So let me see here. You know, and anybody, you know, who was around back then knows exactly what I'm talking about with, you know, how bad these lines were set. Like, go ask Zach White or go ask Rufus, like, how the NFL player props were in 2016 or before, back to 2009. Like, they just weren't efficient. You know, I still remember, like, I got Mahomes in the Super Bowl, the first Super Bowl against the 49ers. He opened it like 343 and just instantly popped it. Like, when, like, something like that, it was just an absurd number. But yeah, the way they would set lines back then was just crazy. You know, if you had a wide receiver who happened to run a reverse in one game for 60 yards, and then maybe the next 8 games he did nothing, and then the next week now, they put a rush plus receive on this guy, they just tack 25, 30 yards onto his receiving total because he ran for 60 yards one time. So, like, stuff like that. Stuff like that happened a lot with that guy. I can't remember his name. He was the Ohio State, I think he's slot receiver. He played for the Panthers for a while. name isn't ringing a bell, but somebody will know who it is. But he's like a switchblade type guy. When he was at Ohio State, he did get a lot of carries, but they would just overcompensate what the line should be. And it was just like, wasn't even close. You just bet the under every time. You know, another example, like running back catches 2 passes in a game once. Team plays 10 games. And then they just throw out 2.5. There's no rhyme, no reason. It's not because they're playing them. They're going to be down. They're going to throw more screens, whatever. They would just set it at 2.5 because maybe, I don't know, maybe he caught 3 passes once. They just set it at 2.5, and then you just bet the under, and you just do that at scale across the board. That was one of my biggest edges in the early days. Was just, all right, just scroll down to the running backs. Where did they set them at? How broken are they? You know, and they would just lay it minus 150 to the under, thinking that's going to scare you away. Or maybe they thought that was the correct price, but I made a ton of money off these. A partner of mine used to come up with narratives. Well, they're playing them and they're doing this and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes he was right, but at the end of the day, if you have 100 of these examples, it doesn't matter if you get it right like 3 of those times. The amount of time you're going to take crunching into figuring out every scenario, whether it could happen or whether it's maybe close to priced right. I was just betting, just bet all the unders here. The math makes sense. Prove me wrong. And if the win rate's coming in north of 60%, I don't need to fucking look at anything. You know, you get longs maybe that would come up in national championship games that were like 24.5 for a receiver, but maybe he only got maybe he went over 24.5 once or twice. Your completions, those were a joke. Like maybe some team was 5-5 for the year, but in all the 5 losses, he averaged 26 completions or something. Most of them were in that range. But maybe for the season, he was a 20 completer, just set it at 20. And it's like, no, they're 10-point dogs. They're going to lose. He's going to have to pass. I've seen it before in all the losing game logs. It's just an easy over. It's off by 5 completions, stuff like that. It was a joke. But these are spots where people do overthink. And sometimes you might run into a new market and talk yourself into maybe why it's right. But oftentimes the stuff's just broken. And back then it was broken. And then, I just fired hard. Questions I was always asking myself back then. How long is this going to last? And it lasted a long time, fortunately. When will the competition show up? It just really never showed up. It didn't really show up until not even year 1 of legalization. Year 2 a little bit. Year 3 a little bit more. Like maybe last year was the first year I really felt like I was going up against something else, or there were other factors that slowed it down. And some of that was the ability of where to get down. But yeah, every year I ask myself, like, when are the sharps coming? Why aren't they here? And it's kind of funny because I was giving accounts to people through a mutual friend, like going through some of the biggest syndicates. And I would see like a college player prop or 2 go through, but never more than like 2 or 3 in a week. And here I am, betting 60 per Saturday or whatever it was. So yeah, I mean, there were times I'd turn the game on a Saturday night to watch whatever game Herb Street and Fowler were doing. And I'd have a blanket under on maybe both teams. And it would just come through and you'd win 85% of them just because the lines were broken. Wasn't really any much to do but simple math. You get 70 and 80% trends going in one direction. You just hammer it. And then over time, as those 70 and 80% go down to 55 to 60% trends, well, you got to do a little more digging and research. You can't just say, okay, this happened 7 times and didn't happen 3 times. You got to evolve a little bit as you go on. And as you get more experience, you're able to do that. But yeah, back then, like the amount of sharps, there were less sharps than there are now. There were sharp groups, but there were less. Other markets were weak too. So like, why is somebody like, let's just use Spanky's name again. Why is he just going to say, all right, we're going to start betting, college player props when he's probably destroying the college football market or destroying the college basketball market. There's just no need to put props into those accounts, really. Like, if you're already just destroying these other markets, it just wouldn't make sense to even really look at those. The other thing is, those college prop markets pre-legalization, they'd show up at like 9:30 on a Saturday morning. They weren't anywhere really during the week. 9:30 Saturday morning they came on, and you had to handicap them. And if you were already banned from Bovada or wherever they were originating, and you weren't betting them there, and you didn't have like a P2 account there or whatever, you just have all the answers ready for when the PPH posted them at like 11 o'clock. So yeah, it was a good 10-year run controlling the market pretty much from opening to close. 2016, I was able to bet, all those offshores. They were all fresh to me. I wasn't cut anywhere. I wasn't winning any sports before that. Some of them gave me long leashes, like winning like 30, 40, 50K. I wouldn't have been able to do it, like I said before, without Bitcoin. Can't stress how important that was back then, because the processing was a nightmare. I was able to just slide in and out of books in minutes, except for maybe getting it out. Sometimes that dragged a little bit, but getting it in was easy. I was confident I could win in 2016. I didn't know how I was going to scale. This was kind of like a side thing for me. I'm still playing poker full time. No legal outs yet. Still successful playing poker. This looked to me as just a side income. All in all, I'm hitting well over 60%. Just figuring out spots that look good. Eliminating the fool's gold to eliminate from my process. I'd find fool's gold spots where it just looked good, and maybe I'd just auto bet that trend, but maybe I'd figure out why that was wrong later. So as far as what I was betting that year, the first year, maybe 250 to 500 a play. Let me see here. Had I not been betting a lot of overs on trends like early in that first year, I would have hit north of 70%, 100%. There were just some painful stuff that I needed to learn. Betting Mississippi State's receiver overs against Alabama, and they're just not playing in the second half, and you have no shot to win it. Stuff like that. So yeah, then I'd eventually eliminated those, and then I realized how important injuries were and how much that could benefit your win rate. Some Saturdays, maybe you have a dozen guys get injured. Maybe you have 6 guys just get benched because teams are losing, or they sucked, or they fumbled, or whatever. That's why the under was always the better play. Maybe that stuff's a little bit more priced in today. It wasn't priced into anything back then. 2017 comes along. We sell our condo. I took a bath on the price. I had to fix a lot of shit up there. I had to have a deposit for the new house. I was just fortunate too. I'm sleeping on my in-laws' basement floor for 2 months. My bankroll was pretty low at this time after all those expenses, having the money I needed to put for the down payment. And, I wasn't playing like monster stakes poker. I was playing enough to survive, but my bankroll was probably run down to like 15 grand it was the lowest it had been in a long time at that time. I went on this blackjack run on Bovada. Again, they were giving Bitcoin bonuses. Put in 1,000, they match 1,000. You could just play blackjack and accrue a certain ROI by playing perfect for a while. But I used to just go big or go home, and I hit them for like 40,000 that one night, and that was huge for me. Got paid 20 Bitcoins, right around there, 15, 20 Bitcoins. It was just huge for me at that point in time, right before I moved. Like I said, I wasn't broke, but it was close to an all-time low. So whatever, I got kicked off of the site I was winning the most money on because I was making more off the guy I was beating than they were probably making in rake, because they had to cover deposit and withdrawal fees, and they had to pay outside companies to do their deposits and withdrawals. So, 2017 rolls around, I start grabbing some paper heads, which was pretty easy for me to do. One of those guys over a couple of year, 2-3 year period, he let me take him for over 100,000, probably 150, before he cut me in 2019. And I eventually got him in as a partner with me. my life was a total wreck from 93 till 2009. But you know what? It paid off now with the paperheads because I hung out with so many dirt balls and degenerates. And most of the guys I ran with, they weren't winning betters, and they were degen betters. I grew up playing sports. Most of the guys I hang out with played a lot of sports, and they're all losing betters. So it was easy to get accounts. Some of these accounts I would get from people from my hometown, 30, 40, 50K without batting an eye. And these bookies would just pay because these guys had been losing for years to them. And, it's whatever. So, I would just be constantly meeting people, be just getting these packages, 20, 30, 40, whatever. In 2017, as I scaled towards the bowls, I stepped it up. Now I'm betting 1,000 a play, maybe popping a couple thousand here and there. My bookie asked me at the time, like, why are you betting all these unders? Like every play that comes, you don't bet any overs? Like what's going on here? Is there a secret? And this guy was a friend of mine, and this is the guy that, eventually cut me off after letting me win over six figures. But, I just told them, I think they're setting them too high because they were the bowl game. But they were setting them all too high every week. I said, I think they set them high for the bowl game, just kind of like guessing almost. But they used to put these QB props up. It was TDs plus interceptions. And, they would just set every player at like 4.5 or whatever. And whatever they set them at, like, these guys had never gotten to that number, like 80 to 90% of the games they played that year. And those things they all won. They were, I might have won like 15 in a row at some point. Maybe you lose a couple, but these things were winning. It didn't happen 80, 90% of the time. So when you bet the under, they're winning 80 to 90% of the time. That's how soft it was back then. It didn't take a genius to just bet the unders here. But I did it because I knew, and I was there, and I was looking for this stuff now. Not many people were, like I mentioned before, these syndicates. Somebody in like one of these big syndicates like Spanky or maybe like a Juan Martinez or something. These guys probably weren't waking up and having people scour through these prop menus. Well, maybe Juan Martinez was, but certainly not somebody like Spanky probably wasn't looking for something like this, or any of the other bigger groups, Billy Walters, whoever. They're probably not looking for, you couldn't bet a ton of money on these. You just needed to keep replenishing your offshores or your PPH. And I did. I'd wake up every fucking Saturday at 10, or I knew when the lines would originate for Thursday or the MAC games or whatever it was, whatever the case may be. And it just didn't take a genius to bet the under. So, the best thing too about betting all that broken shit was as the lines get tighter, it's just easier to bet and find what you shouldn't be betting based on what you've seen in the past. So you're winning at a big rate by default without really doing any research, but simple math like 6-3, 7-4, 5-3, trends like that. Like I could give you every one of those percentages off the top of my head without doing any math, just by knowing and seeing whatever it is. 7-4, like I could just rattle off what that is without doing any math. But the best thing about betting that stuff, you just you see what's not working in certain situations, and you can just get rid of it, and you just know, like, maybe that's not the trend you want to be betting on. But again, it didn't really matter because at the end of the day, you see those leaks, but you're already winning. You're winning by default because the lines are so bad, and you're just getting a boost because you're using these trends to bet into it. Let me see here. Yeah, and then that same year I got this quote. I remember this kind of got my ears perked up a little bit, and Bill Perkins made this quote on a podcast, just like, it's easy to make $1 million. You get an edge, and then you just pound it and pound it and pound it and just scale it and scale it and scale it and scale it over and over. Now you're a millionaire, and then you keep doing it, and then you're a billionaire. So, as far as the money goes, it mattered to me. But, I loved the process of just using math to beat the books. I felt like I had a gear. Like I said, I woke up every Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, and just 9:30 or whatever, and just started handicapping every fucking game they listed in the country. Every player went through every single game log as lightning fast as I could, and I just got better and better at it as I went along. So I just had that fucking work ethic, and when it came to legalization later, which I'll get in another episode, I went hard there too. So I found my mark, and I just fucking killed them. Put my foot to the throat, and there wasn't a lot of competition around then. And if there was, I would try and just bet the stuff first, and just let it flow. But if the stuff made it to the paper heads, there just weren't a lot of groups betting this stuff, because I would have seen it all move on the paper heads if they beat me to it. Once in a while it would happen if they had a play, but not often. So yeah, let me see here. Other things I would do, if the books didn't have these lines up, the PPH, which copied from Bovada, MyBookie, or wherever, I had the numbers eventually to every single offshore skin, like, your LV Actions or wherever. Like if I just go into my phone, or I go into my phone right now, I have a number to every offshore book. I would call them posing as an agent, like, hey, where's the fucking SMU game? They'd be like, what's your agent number? I'd be like, I don't have time for this shit. My players need the college football props up for that game. I'm getting texts and calls off the hook. There's a fucking huge game here, even though it's like some scrub team, but Bovada has it listed. And then I would just say, get the fucking line up, and I'd hang up the phone. And, sometimes if, I'd do that if it was close to game. I would act like a pissed off asshole agent. And then 10 minutes later, the lines would just pop up on there. If it was earlier, I'd be nice about it. Sometimes I'd just pretend like I was a customer. Hey, I'm looking for the Michigan-Ohio State game. Where is everything? And sometimes they wouldn't post them till like 11:55. Game kicks off at noon. But I already have everything capped from going through Bovada, MyBookie, etc. And then I would just try and get them all down. So yeah, I was always prepared for that. Sometimes back in the early days, I didn't check the weather. There was a Boise, Wyoming game or something one year, and I was betting on someone's account, and I look at these lines, and I'm like, wow, these are just so low. I bet all the overs, and then I found out it was just one of those wind games, and I got wiped out, and that got me thinking about wind. How valuable is wind? How many people are using wind in, these extreme conditions? So it taught me a valuable lesson about the weather, and I'll talk about that probably in the next episode, how, I was getting lots of money down on these wind games when it was pretty sure that there was going to be 30 plus mile per hour winds or gusts up to 60 and 70. So yeah, I remember that. I sent all these orders out, and I just got crushed. Kid complained. I didn't even know. I woke up to these messages the next day, like, what the fuck happened with that game? And, I just went too fast. It was like a Thursday night game too. Maybe I was going out. I was busy. I didn't look into it, but I just wasn't looking. I wasn't prepared for it. The weather. I just hadn't gotten dusted by the weather yet, but I did get dusted there. So one thing that was good, I didn't scale too fast and fall flat on my face. It happens to a lot of people. They start jumping into other sports. I didn't care about other sports. I went from a $250 better to a $500 better to a $1,000 better to a $2,000 better to a $4,000 better per prop, 5,000. And I'm trying to get in 10 and 20, and then sometimes 50 if I could get it in. And then some games I'm getting in $500,000. Some games I'm getting $1 million down on, just spread out like the Super Bowl. I just scaled up little by little by little. And I was just fortunate that I had the runway to get to just do that and not have a lot of competition. I was fortunate, when legalization came, that I was already prepared, because I went through this in 16, 17, 18, 19, But the truth of the matter is, betting 20, people would look down and make fun of prop bettors back then. And, a lot of seasoned pros would tell me, this would die or it's not sustainable, etc. Truth to some degree, maybe back then, but it's way more widely accepted now. But the truth of the matter is, if I have a 15 to 20% edge on a $20,000, scale on props, that's better than somebody betting $100,000 on an NFL game. Now, they may have more longevity than me if their model doesn't break, and whatever they do, is sustainable long term, but doesn't. I don't care about that. I'm trying to make as much money in as little bit of a time, or as much time as I can over time. Um, yeah. So whatever, that didn't matter to me, but that's one way to look at it. You got that type of edge, and you're getting 20K down. You have no variance. There's, and it's not even worth sweating. I just stopped sweating stuff because I just knew I was going to win. But anyhow, let me see here. Here's another thing. It was so easy back then when I started using per heads. I was able to give people, 20% free rolls with no makeup, 30% free rolls. I'd try to give them a makeup, but some people are like, no, I don't want to make up. You still get people to do that now. I would never do that now. But the win rate was so big back then, I could get some good accounts and be like, all right, yeah, you got a 30% free roll, no makeup. That means I have to eat all the losing weeks. But like I said before, it was rare to have a losing week because I won mostly every week, for the most part. The goal was to, just like I said, I just have the openers and I would just fucking blast them away. And then, first it started on the offshores. I would just blast the screen in the morning before everything copied to the paper heads. So then maybe when they got there, like, what the fuck? People probably like, what the fuck? I didn't have any per heads, but then when I got the per heads, I had to wait and hope nobody else did that. So, that's how it was in the beginning. I would just hit the openers and hammer them and the lines would move. I probably should have messed around with more market manipulation then to hit some stuff. They come to the per heads and then just get down a ton, but I never did that. Didn't have to really do that because I didn't need the lines to be much better because they were so bad. But, it just feels good when you become the hunter and you're not the hunted anymore and you're not that degen that they're fucking giving VIP accounts to. That felt good for me. There were probably arbors out there, even in recent years, I could even call some of these guys dummies. They're thinking they're getting some value after I blew the market to smithereens, just because I'm getting down max on props when they're 70, 80, 100 cents off. It might look good on a certain site where I just triple popped it and moved it to 175, but I'm doing that for a reason. But yep, I didn't care. They just feed the other side. Now it's a little bit different. The market's a lot more sharper and whatever. The people probably taking that stuff could make a killing off it, if somebody did that, like right now today, because the lines are just so much more efficient by the time they hit these screens where you can, bet stuff multiple times, because they've been around for 3 or 4 days. It wasn't like that back then. So the money was good, and people, you talk about money can't buy happiness. The money was good, and they say it can't buy happiness, but I disagree. And I actually just listened to Calvin and Hobo on Circles Off, but it can buy peace of mind. Like a couple of years ago, interest rates were high, and my wife went in, bought a car, and she got some dumb rate. And then I showed up there. She already signed the paperwork before I got there, and just tore it up and just paid for it in cash because the interest rate was just retarded. Not cash, I just wrote a check. Here you go. So, anyone that tells you that money can't buy happiness, maybe it can't buy you happiness, but it can buy you peace of mind. Simple things like going out for dinner and just not thinking about, you just paid a couple $100. Things that I had to worry about before, or even in my early days of professional gambling, worrying about the cost of dinners or groceries or, budgeting and shit like that. Like, when you have money, some of that stuff, the stress does go away. So, having the money, to me, it wasn't about the money. It was just about having it as a tool just to lead a solid life, to make sure my family's taken care of, and not worrying about it. And then that enables me to take time off if I need to. So let me see here. So that's part of the thing, betting at the highest stakes that I could bet, and being the most successful and helping people, that's the pinnacle for me for like the work that I've done the past 10 years. I've had the honor of working with some of the best gamblers and sports bettors and meeting some of the best gamblers and sports bettors. I missed out on the poker boom, but the tail end of it, I got. And that taught me how to win, lose, and grind and how to hammer edges when I found the edge. And I did, and I hammered it. So that's why I'm here talking to you today. So let me see here. Yeah, I always did say, when the next poker boom comes, I'm ready for it. It never came, but the sports boom did come, and I accidentally walked into it before it happened. I was hoping like Encore Boston Harbor in 2019 would be this fucking haven just to crush fish, rich fish from Boston. Never happened. We were hoping for these suits to go in there and just drop all their checks and bonuses. Never happened. At least not at the games I was playing. But the sports boom did come. I'll talk about that in the next episode. Everything I just told you prepared me for the sports boom when it came. And I attacked that even harder than what I'm telling you now. Leading up to now, like to the sports boom, I probably was betting 4,000 a prop by the time, maybe around the time the pandemic hit. So I'd already scaled up, and now these places, 2017 or whatever it was in Jersey, that wasn't me. But DraftKings came into New Hampshire in like 2019, 2020. So I scaled it up to about 4K per prop in a few years, and there were just no legal accounts. So you had to find PPHs, or you had to find ways to get down offshore after they already cut you, and then they would cut fast if they seen how you were betting. I've been on Bovada and clicked a button and one bet, and they just wipe your whole account as like just $1 on everything. Speaking of Bovada, right? My wife, I taught her to become a great handicapper, and I'll never forget, she got a phone call and they were asking her all these player names. I didn't even recognize some of them. Who's Jawan Jennings? Who's this guy? Who's that guy? All these Tennessee receivers up and down. She had no fucking idea what was happening, but they paid her out. But it was the second account that was coming through my house. That's why they called. So yeah, eventually, getting to the point where I just got 100, 500K just on games, spread out across multiple, just multiple props, not feeling sick about it, and I've won in the majority of these spots for years. Just massive landslide wins for years. Having $1 million on props and Super Bowls and stuff, I look at that and just say, how many people can say that they've had $1 million in action on a fucking game? And I never dreamed I'd be able to do that. For me, from where I came from, how I grew up and where I was, with the drinking and the drugs and stuff like that. I mean, this is a monumental success for me from where I was coming from. Go listen to episode 14 of this podcast if you haven't. That'll tell you, how fucked up I was. I think it was episode 14. So that's, where I was, and this is how far I came. So by the time the 2020 pandemic came, I feel like I was the best prop better in the world, at least in college football. Wasn't focusing as much on NFL. I just didn't have the time for it. And there was just more volume for me to get on weak spots in the NFL. So and I'm just saying this, I was the only one at that time that I know of that was betting and was scaling like this at the time. So yeah, by the time the pandemic came and this stuff got legal in New Hampshire and props were only restricted to a certain amount of states, I was lucky. This was one of the first states. I feel like you could say by default or whatever, I feel like I was the best in the world at doing this at that time. And I probably was up until maybe a year ago. Maybe I still am now, but I just don't have the same drive. I wouldn't say it's the same drive. It's just I can make money in other ways now, and I'm shifting away from this, but shifting more away from just having college props is what I do. I still bet them. I still win. It's just not like it was then. My goal was to just get all the meat off of the bone. Well, it was really meaty and easy to eat. There was no vultures around to take it, and I think I did a good job at that. And yeah, I could just tell by the line moves that it was me. You know, wasn't some of them would move here and there, but not at the scale. The scale across all the games, it was me moving them all. And again, I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you how it was. That's what it was. That's what I lived, and that's why I'm sitting here talking to you today. So you know, I was lucky to live in New England. I think 3 or 4 of the states here all had college props. Most other states didn't. So remember, you got to think for yourself too. How many people told me I wasn't going to be able to do this for a long time? Just saying I'm going to get caught. You're not going to make enough money, etc. They were all wrong because it worked out. And maybe the legalization helped me. But even before that, I was scaled up to 4,000 a prop, making good money. I probably had sometime around the pandemic, I scaled up to like a $500,000 bankroll or something like that. So whatever, I did pretty well. So think for yourself, because some smart people could give you some bad advice, and when you know you're right, just go with your gut. Some of the sharpest people in the world are just dead wrong sometimes. Just look at all the people that forecasted Bitcoin to go to nothing, and now you're looking at whatever it is, 80 to 100K a coin, wherever it is right now. I don't even look at it anymore. But yep. So sports betting, it's designed for like 99.9% to fail. I'm just lucky that I fall in the 0.01% or the 1% or whatever that can do it for a living. It's extremely small. I'm proud to be part of the club that can do it, did do it, and was able to, build and move on to other stuff now. But anyhow, so yeah, that pretty much takes you up to the pandemic. So, I was able to go from 200 to 4K. I owned most of the action. A lot of the accounts I got early too were like PPHs for me, or I was giving people free rolls. So it was good. I was able to keep a lot of the money that I made. I was able to help a lot of people. And when I got to about 4,000 a game, that's when I got some adverse selection where I'm betting a lot, but not on the best of the accounts, because the best of the accounts had already been dusted. And now I'm betting on accounts that don't have the juiciest of the juicy stuff. So I dealt with that for a little while, but after a little while, I think I went a month. I started betting, I think, 4K a game, and I might have went 3 or 4 weeks without winning, which was rare for me. And let me see here. I have a few questions before I'm going to end this. Let me go down here. Someone asked me about the bonuses back in the day. And like I said, you could just get 1,000 unlimited on Bovada. You deposit 1,000, they give you 1,000. Deposit 1,000 in Bitcoin, they give you 1,000 to play in the casino. And you could just go in the casino pretty much and ghost ride that 1,000. Merge Network, same way. But I wasn't a casino bonus whore. They had the same thing. You could just unlimited reload. And it didn't matter if you already had money in the account. You could do it like 10 times and just take these joy rides in the casino. And you just had to clear the $1,000 playthrough. It was very easy. So anyhow, let me see here. Some questions. Yeah, so they were profitable, but I wasn't one of the guys going in and out of casinos. I was just taking advantage of what I saw. This guy asked, let me see here. How soft was it really? I think I did a pretty good job of telling you. Player average, sometimes worse than the player average. That comes from novice bets. It was worse. And had it not been so soft, or had I lost for a couple of weeks, I might have just quit and stuck with poker, but it just went and I just kept going with it. Which market? King of Props offered the biggest edges during that era. Pro or college? I would say college, but the pro market was soft as well. They just did bad shit. Go back and look at Eli Manning's rushing yard. Someone told me they used to set his at like 1.5 every week, and maybe he would get 2 yards once in a season, something like that. So they were super soft. Like I said, You can ask Rufus and Zach White how soft they were before I started doing this. They were soft then too. I mean, if you just bet all the unders, you won. You do a little bit of research, and you could just use trends. You didn't even need projections. Just look at the past trends and just see why the line is so bad, and you could win. Unrelated question, trying to work on a theory, niche market, anywhere in particular I should be looking to try or see if anyone has already tested my theory, or just try to get some extra info if I'm onto something. The market will just tell you. That's all. I mean, looking to try and see if anyone is already aware or tested your theory. See where the market opens and closes. That's what I would do. I mean, that's pretty much, the market will tell you. I mean, the market's pretty sharp now. They move. It's hard to find edges. If you have something, test it out. But people still find edges every day. They're just not going to find something on the scale like I did, because somebody else will pick it up now, because there's so many eyes in America on these legal sites that they will get covered up fast. Ever been a market you were working on an edge for that you found another edge in a completely different market? Yeah, I mean, the way you price some of this stuff just off past trends, I mean, NBA, like they were pricing Nikola Jokic double-doubles. To have a double-double, you'd lay like minus 200 or minus 240. When he had like 70 double-doubles that year, you just lay 240 and you just print. Or like, I've talked about these before, Devin Booker, no double-double. Minus, I don't know what it was, like minus 450 to 650. You could have bet it to like minus 1400. He had like 3 double-doubles in 82 games or something like that. Stuff like that. So by using trends and pricing stuff off past trends, you can price certain markets. Now, again, though, with the NBA, it's a little more difficult with the lineup changes. As long as the lineup changes are pretty much not moving, then there you go. So I'll leave you with this message before we go, and that's how I'll pick up the next podcast.
Hey, I shut down the site last night after the day was over. Just had enough. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how it's done. I don't know how you get, a guy that needs to get 4 yards in 9 minutes, and he's got 283 and he gets no more, and stuff like that. And it's just uncanny, the shit that happens. It's unbelievable, actually. One game after another, I go from one game, turn to another game that should be going my way, and it just stops or goes the other way. It's like, what? Mind-boggling. And after a while, you gotta say, wait a minute, whether it's karma or jinx or fucking voodoo, whatever, I don't know, but I'm done. So we'll have to figure out a way for me.
So yeah, that's a broken bookie right there. Dealt with a lot of those. I've gotten a lot of death threats from other bookies over the years just for winning. That guy was nice about it. I've known that guy since the late 90s, always paid. But it was extra fun beating his brains in and I was an agent for that guy at one point, way back in the day, and I got intertwined back up with him sometime around the pandemic, and took him for a pretty good ride. And, he's a big boy. He can make his own decisions. He told me he was undefeated since 1987, that nobody won. And, that's what happens. You learn how to win, and you just break people. And that felt good breaking him. I didn't break him, but just getting cut off by him. So there you go. Get good enough at this stuff. People will threaten to kill you. Whether they really mean it or not, they will. And, you get messages like that. So that's it. Have a good day.